I'm Tisha Bader. Welcome to our series Durban Revisited on JBS in partnership with B'nai B'rith International. Discussions with a number of leaders and experts about the blatant anti-Semitism seen at the UN Conference on Racism, which was held in Durban, South Africa in 2001, and about facing anti-Semitism today around the world. Here now is CEO of B'nai B'rith International, Dan Mariaschin, and guest Bernard-Henri Lévy.
Thank you, Tisha. Bernard-Henri Lévy is a French public intellectual, a celebrated philosopher, writer, and filmmaker. Bernard-Henri Lévy, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you. To begin with, I think we can acknowledge the decision by President Macron that France will not participate in the upcoming Durban commemoration. And surely this is an important signal for French Jews, among others. And you've written about this very topic. Most recently, there was an op-ed that you wrote in the Jerusalem Post. But we've been hearing, at least since the time of Durban, of a growing problem of anti-Semitism in France, with not a few members of the French Jewish community feeling a sense of real danger and even disruption to their lives. How much of this do you think really started with Durban?
A lot of it started with Durban. Durban was, in a very dark way, an historical date. It was the act of birth of the new anti-Semitism. Act of birth of this new anti-Semitism on a large scale, on a mass scale. The paradigm was built much before, which is the assimilation between the anti-Semitism under disguise of anti-Zionism. This was already an old story in some circles, but it became a worldwide mass, a possible worldwide mass movement with Durban. And in France, it is clear. It gave a clearance, it gave an authority, it gave a legitimacy to this new anti-Semitism. So for this, Durban 1 was a real point and a real moment of our contemporary history, no doubt.
Well, many media outlets globally don't seem to recognize that the demonization of Israel can have consequences not just for Jews living in Israel, but also all the Jews living elsewhere in the world. How prevalent in Europe is the charge that Israel is racist, that Israel is an apartheid state? And how does this impact the life of a Jew, in the case of France, walking the streets of Paris or Marseille or any other city?
First of all, the demonization of Israel, I would say, is the only way today in France and in Europe to be anti-Semitic. Someone who is deeply anti-Semitic, who hates Jews, will not say that he hates Jews because they are a special race. He will not say that he hates Jews because of biological reasons. He will not revive the Nazi wording about anti-Semitism. The only possible way, acceptable way of being anti-Semitic today is to say that the Jews are associated to Israel, that Israel is an apartheid state, and that this apartheid state has to be combated by all means. So the question is not that there is a link between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. The question is that the new form, and in a way the only possible form of anti-Semitism today, consists in the hate of Israel. So of course it has some practical consequences. If you are, I'm sorry to say it this way, but if you are Ilan Halimi, if you are Sarah Halimi, if you are these children of the school of Toulouse who were shot dead by Mohamed Merah and others, this assimilation, this way of using the demonization of Israel in order to feed the beast of anti-Semitism has real consequences. You can be shot, you can be shot, you can be dead, you can die, of course.
Well, the problem of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism by any standard, not just in France, but everywhere, is worsening. What are the factors in your mind that have fueled this animosity in your country specifically, and how would you score the track record of successive French governments going back some years in responding to anti-Semitism, both in seriousness of purpose as well as in effect?
In France, if you take this case, which I know a little better, but similar things could be said about other European countries and maybe about America, by the way. This anti-Semitism is growing. You have a growing number of people who say and who believe, probably sincerely, that for the sake of the true victims of the moment, in order to serve the cause of the true victims, and maybe they think sometimes crazier, they are the new Jews of today, who are the Palestinians. You have a growing number of people who say, we have to hate Israel, therefore the Jews. And there is a legitimacy thinking this way. It's terrible, but it is a fact. If somebody comes in the street saying that Jews have to be despised because they have a special face or special, it will not work. The only way for the anti-Semitism to work is through the demonization of Israel. This begins to be in France a real trend in the society, on the right and on the left. And I must say that the state, the government, you asked me the question, started since a few years to be aware and conscious of that. And I must pay tribute and pay homage to the current president of France, Emmanuel Macron, who said 1 year and a half ago, 2 years ago maybe, in an important speech in front of the CRIF, who said that anti-Semitism was not the only way off, but was one of the ways of the anti-Semitism to grow today in France. He said it. He was brave, he was bold, he spoke true, and he said that anti-Zionism is not this innocent and nice way, anti-Zionism, of defending Palestinian cause, as they say, and as they said in Durban. So in France, President Macron really made a breach on that. It started before him with President Hollande, with Prime Minister Manuel Valls. There is a real consciousness today, a bunch of people in the elite, in the ruling circles, who are conscious that this anti-Zionism is a plague, that it is a way to legitimize anti-Semitism. This idea now is making its path and its road through the spirits and the minds in my country.
Well, there was a time when we had books and we had newspapers and messages moved, and television too, messages moved a bit more slowly. Today, though, with social media, we have so-called influencers here in the United States who have millions of followers. How much of the globalization of contemporary anti-Semitism do you attribute to social media?
a lot, but not all. Durban 1, 20 years ago, as far as I know, social medias did not have the influence that they have today. And it was like a fire in the plain, a fire in the bush, all of a sudden in a few days. So you cannot reverse the causality. The causality is in ideas, not in technicity. Techniques is just a help for bad ideas or good ideas. This being said, you are right. They have an influence. And the problem is not the millions of followers. The real problem is that in the social media of today, there is a new pretension, a new idea, which is that each opinion equals the other. The principle of the social media is that everyone has the right to speak, and that every speech has an equal right to pretend to be true. This is a real problem today. A crazy, nuts, hater of Jews has an opinion, which for me is not an opinion, it's a crime. But he says it's my opinion, and it is worth your opinion, Mr. Bernard-Henri Lévy or whoever. This is the problem of the social media. Number three, we have to use, this is our time. We cannot go backwards, so we have to use the social media. Myself, if I may, I am on the social media. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. I am on Instagram, and I consider them as a battlefield. I receive a lot of blows, I can tell you, when I say that Israel is a great democracy, when I say that it is even an example of democracy, even something for the West. And when I say that the only way to be anti-Semitic is to hate Israel, I receive huge blows on the social medias. But I stand. I try to make my point, and thanks God, if I dare say, I have some supporters. I have some brave ladies and gentlemen who retweet my tweets, and we wage the battle. This is a new battlefield. The new battlefield is also, not only, also on social media. And we don't have to surrender on this field. We have to give blow in coup pour coup, as we say in France, blow for blow.
Going back to Durban, a strategy that seems to be associated with it is to isolate Israel and to stigmatize it and weaken it. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement was famously propelled by the Durban conference. It seems that BDS has found Europe to be a more fertile climate, perhaps, than even the US, although there are alarming trends here as well. Why do you think this is the case in terms of BDS, and what can be done to oppose this kind of discrimination against Israelis?
BDS, we have to remind and recall on and on. Number one, that it is the idea of the boycott of Israel was born as a neo-Nazi idea. It was born after Second World War in a game where former Nazis, having taken refuge in Arab countries, connected with some Arab fascists, and they built the first concept of the boycott of the young Israel. This has to be reminded. Number two, we have to remind and recall and repeat that the BDS partisans are not partisans of peace, but of war. They are warriors. The only way to be partisan of peace, you can discuss the modality, but it is to be favorable to the two states solution. It is the only way to be really favorable to peace. The BDS people, they say one state solution. One state solution, which means war. So their birthplace was the scenery of the late fascism or even Nazism, and their real will is to ignite and to put fire on the inside the spirits in order to fuel war. These are the two things which we have to repeat to this kind and sometimes naive, to be honest. I hope so. People who believe that by preaching BDS, they are fighting for democracy and for peace. It is the contrary. They are fighting against democracy, against peace. And you have inside the BDS movement, you have probably some people who can be still convinced, whom we can take out of this hellish way of thinking. Some we will not. They know what they do. They know that they are cynical. We just have to resist to them and to oppose to their weak force a real force, which is the force of the truth, the force of the ethics, the force of morality. And that is my strong belief. The only way of fighting anti-Semitism is to oppose to it the strength, the moral strength, the political strength, and the pride of Israel and of the Jews. Pride against infamy.
We often think that anti-Semitism now most often manifests itself among three very distinct factions. You've heard this, perhaps you use it, this perfect storm from the far left, the far right, and from the Islamists. Where do you see the most potent threat right now and into the future? And do all of these groups latch on to a Durban-type message in the same way, or are there differences? And what can be done, perhaps most importantly, to make sure that anti-Semitism is taken as seriously as all forms of racism?
First of all, we have to say on and on, this is one of the points which I raised in the Jerusalem Post op-ed, that anti-Zionism, demonization of Israel, this way of putting the focus on Palestinians alone is a way to delete, is a way to send into obscurity all the other victims of the world. I cannot forget, my friend, the day of Durban. It happened that I was coming back myself from a series of reportages in what I called forgotten wars. I was in Africa, I was in Sri Lanka, I was in Darfur, many places of this sort. I remember how these people, these victims of the genocide of Darfur, of the cooking genocide of Burundi, they hoped, they were full of hope because of Durban, before Durban. They heard that there was a stage where at the end, finally, they could make their voice heard. And they came to Durban full of hope. And what did they see? They see that the partisans of the so-called Palestinian cause hijacked the conference, occupied the stage, and said to the rest of the world, there is only one victim worth of attention, Palestinian. There is only one cause worth fighting for, Palestinian. There is only one guilty, Israel. What do you think that the people of Rwanda of intouchable Indians, Darfur thought that they were the victims of Durban as well as the Jews and the Israelis. So this is a point which we have to make. This way of this narrative, putting the Middle East question at the center, at the epicenter of everything, is an insult to all the other victims of the world.
Well, finally, this is a time in many ways of instability, populism, political polarization, now the pandemic and its economic consequences. Such conditions would not normally be favorable for Jews, especially as a small minority in the diaspora. So to play the prophet, if you will, what is your prognosis for the years and decades ahead? Progression or retrogression?
Resistance. Neither this nor that. Anti-Semitism will not disappear. It will not be eradicated. But we have in our hands, you, B'nai Brit, intellectuals like myself and many others, the possibility of opposing to this black tide of anti-Semitism a wall of strength, of morality, and of truth. By doing so, we will not eliminate it, but we will resist. And this is a real stake. This is a real target. Resist it, contain. What we have to hope, what I do hope for the next decades, is containment. Containment. I will not accept, I don't accept the idea which sometimes in some meetings we say, we will eradicate anti-Semitism forever. We will not. But we can contain. We can be stronger than them. We, Jews, friends of the Jews, allies of the Jews. There are many Christians, true Democrats, ladies and gentlemen of spirit. We have to oppose to their dark force a stronger force of truth and of hope. This is the real sense of the history as I foresee it.
Well, Bernard-Henri Lévy, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your insights and your observations. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in. Please stay tuned to our full Durban Revisited series on JBS. And for ways to get engaged, please visit jbstv.org, b'naibrith.org, or our social media channels. I'm Dan Mariaschin. Goodbye for now.